Greetings, friends. Thank you for watching our video. Today we have a very special guest, Pastor Greg Hamilton. Pastor Greg, just tell us a little bit about your background. I know you worked as an administrator, as a pastor, and there is much more. So just tell us, for those viewers that don't know you yet, a few things about yourself.
Well, I grew up wanting to be a professional baseball player, and I tried out for Cincinnati Reds when I was 18. I did really well. My dad wanted me to be a pastor, so I went off to Pacific Union College in Napa, California, Angwin, and got A's in Greek, and but decided that ministry wasn't for me. It bored me to tears, and so I left up to Canada, up to northern British Columbia, Canada, and built 13 two-story log homes, including a log church that seats 500 with a full balcony and basement. And I was really skinny, and I was strong. I was all muscle. Then I went from there to New York City to work with two different evangelists, Tony Moore and O.J. Mills. And Tony Moore and I raised a church together of 130 members in 3 years and built the church. And it's still there, and it's a thriving church. And then I got a taste of ministry. And then I came home to Bakersfield, California, where I met my wife, Laura, my future wife, at a Bible study. And we got married. She put me through school at Portland State University in Portland, Oregon, and communications, journalism with a political science minor. And I went from there to become a pastor. I got a call. I sent out resumes to all the conferences in the North American division. Ended up with 6 interviews, and it ended up with an internship out in the middle of nowhere in Elko and Winnemucca, Nevada, along Interstate 80, and out in the desert. And we had 59 baptisms in less than 3 years. My churches were 2 hours apart, and most of my members lived anywhere an hour and a half to 2 hours away from the church out in the desert. And but we started up small group Bible studies, had great harvest, and then they transferred me to Lake Tahoe district near Reno, Nevada, and they ordained me after 4.5 years. And I never went to Andrews. I wished I had gone to Andrews, mind you. But after working on my history degree at the University of Nevada, Reno, and pastoring, I sent in my resume and a questionnaire to Baylor University, Baptist University in Waco, Texas. It's the largest, oldest, most prestigious Baptist university in the world, and enrolled into the J.M. Dawson Institute of Church-State Studies, where I ended up graduating and writing an original work, 402-page dissertation on Sandra Day O'Connor's judicial philosophy on the role of religion in public life. And from there, I got a call to the North Pacific Union Conference, Northwest headquarters for the church, which covers the states of Alaska, Idaho, Montana, Oregon, and Washington. Had a team of 32 attorneys and lobbyists that worked with me that covered the state legislatures, the state capitals, and the courts, and all levels, county, city, municipal, you name it. And I was very much involved in the interfaith movement, as well as the ecumenical groups, and helped pass a number of pieces of significant legislation in all 5 states, and handled 4,103 workplace discrimination cases involving union membership and, of course, Sabbath accommodation in the workplace. So it was a busy time. I was speaking all over the United States, doing 7 programs a year at 3ABN on Liberty Insider, and doing diplomatic work in Romania. Was the keynote speaker in 28 cities there and helped stop a 6-day workweek law. Also did diplomatic work in South Africa and the Philippines. So I'm retired now. I built the Hamilton Library and Constitution Center out here in Grand Junction, Colorado, which is the western slope of Colorado. It's 25 miles from the Utah border. And we host seminars here. We interview famous people. We teach people about the basics of the Constitution, especially the intent of the constitutional founders to separate church and state, which a lot of people want to totally abolish. So that's what I do. And it's on our small ranch here, a small acreage, This building is adjacent to our home here. And so we just had a famous guest here. We had a Secret Service fella who was head of the Secret Service under the Dwight Eisenhower, John F. Kennedy, and Lyndon Johnson presidential administrations. He's 92, and we had CBS TV news coverage here live last Thursday, and they aired it on Friday evening and last evening, Monday evening of this week. And we're hoping to get him on 60 Minutes on CBS. We're also hoping to get this fellow named Gerald Blaine, who wrote what's called The Kennedy Detail, New York Times bestselling book. We're going to try to get him on the Rocky Mountain public broadcasting system, radio and TV here. So we'll see what happens. It's that kind of stuff that I like to do. PR work, uplift people, honor their careers, honor their lives, where people don't get much thanks in their life. It's nice to really uplift people. And by doing that, loving your neighbor as yourself, as the Bible instructs us to do. So that's what I love to do.
Yeah, thank you, Pastor Hamilton. Well, listen, today I would like to speak to you regarding the separation of church and state. What does it really mean for Christians when they say separation of church and state? Does that mean that we as Christians should just be totally quiet, not involved? In your view and experience and in sync with the Bible, what do you think it means, separation of church and state?
Well, there has to be a certain amount of cooperation between church and state. But when you look at the original intent of the framers, the First Amendment very clearly says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. That means government is to remain neutral. I'll give you an example. Sandra Day O'Connor, who just died, Supreme Court Justice, who I did my dissertation on, she wrote the following. She said, religious liberty, the undisputed central goal of the religion clauses, that is the establishment or the non-establishment clause and the free exercise clause, must not be conditioned on the individual's forfeiture of the status of equal citizenship. Government is to be neutral in matters of religion, showing neither favoritism nor disapproval towards citizens based on their personal choices. Now, that's significant, because I know that's highbrow language, but when you really think about it, the separation of church and state simply means that the church has a very significant role, and the founding fathers knew that, and they didn't want the government to interfere with religion, but neither did they want religion telling them what to do. Now, they have a voice in a democratic system. Yes, they have a legitimate voice. There's a time and a place for the church or religious peoples to stand up for what is right, because it is right. And that's our duty. We need to speak up. We need to have a clarion call on certain issues, whether it be moral issues. And I understand some of the views on the right regarding abortion, homosexuality. I get that, okay? But here's the problem. Dwight Nelson summed it up pretty well in a sermon just, about a year and a half ago, just before he retired. In fact, he made it was a burden on his heart before he retired from the village church there or the Pioneer Church there at Andrews University, where you probably graduated from. And he said, when you look at the rights of homosexuals, okay, under the 14th Amendment with the Equal Protection Clause, okay, that's there, the state has its role and the church has its role. And what are those two roles? Well, the church has a right to erect a barrier, a wall, a high and impregnable wall that says, hey, we have a right to hire who we want to. We don't have to, we have mission statements that are very clear. And that doesn't mean hiring known homosexuals or gay couples, okay? And because we have a certain standard, a mission standard, we have a right to discriminate within our religious mission and purpose, all right? So the church has its right to stand for what it believes and to be a voice, a moral voice in society, okay? All right, so that's the church's role. Now the state, based upon we the people in a democratic republic, can go a different direction if the majority of the people and the Supreme Court or Congress deems that it's necessary to bring about equal rights to all these classes, then that's their role. And I don't think it's the role of the church to really interfere with that, but some would disagree with me on that. So it's a fine line. And if some disagree with me on that, I honor their choice to do that. But the problem comes when they want to use those issues, okay, such as homosexuality, such as or gay marriage, and or what's the most prominent issue right now? It's not gay marriage. What's the other one?
Abortion.
Abortion, yes. You know, if you want to use that as a stepping stone to then ultimately control government and create a theocracy for the church to control and govern the state, then that's a problem. And that's where they want to head. They will go too far. And let me give you an example. Let me read you a statement from the Great Controversy, page 443. In order for the United States, our beloved country, to form an image of the beast. Now, let's define what an image is. An image is a likeness of something, right? So we're told we're created in the likeness of God, right? So we know that God looks like us. I mean, that's comforting to me. I don't know about you, but you know, not to be overly theological here, but I think that's pretty cool. I mean, okay, so I don't want God to look exactly like me. Oh, God forbid. I mean, I'm an ugly dude compared to him, I'm sure. But the point is that he can relate to us because not only even, and I even argue that even before Jesus came in human form, that God is recognizable and identifiable, somebody we can relate to. Okay. I don't think he's just some, you know, ethereal being up there that scares the bejeebies out of us, you know. I just don't believe that. I believe he's a loving, caring, compassionate, loving God. So it says, in order for the United States to form an image of the beast and the likeness of the beast. Now, what is the beast? The beast, the first beast, especially described in Revelation 13, is Rome, or papal Rome, more specifically. And there, the church, the papacy, manipulated, dominated, and controlled kings and emperors. Now, those are key words: manipulated, dominated, and controlled, lest those kings or emperors be what? Excommunicated. And why could they get away with that power? Because the people backed them ultimately, because the people worship the church, they worship the Pope, they worship the papacy. Whatever the Pope said had to be right. And so therefore the kings could not go against that, no matter how hard they tried. In addition to that, the papacy had its own armies, its own military, to keep those kings and emperors and their military at bay. So we often forget that. So this is what's interesting, is the church was militant. And so in order for the United States to form an image of the beast in the likeness of papal Rome, it has to become militant. And what else does it do? It says, in order for the United States to form an image that is in the likeness of Rome, papal Rome, the religious power, okay, must so control the civil government that the authority of the state will also be employed by the church to accomplish your own ends. Now you go in the context, the rest of the pages from there, from 443 in the Great Controversy by Ellen White to page 450, the context is very clear. It's evangelical Protestants uniting with conservative Catholics to control the civil government of the United States. If you control the civil government, you also control the Constitution. And Ellen White says on page 442 that this united group abolished the Constitution and rewrite it. They have to rewrite it because the original Constitution separates church and state. They don't like the separation of church and state, so they have to unite church and state. In fact, Pastor Marion, it does more than just unite church and state. It causes the church to become the government. Do you see what I'm saying? So that's problematic. And that's what a lot of people seem to be clamoring for. And with this movement in the United States right now for authoritarian dictatorship instead of a democratic republic under the Constitution with the separation of powers, three branches of government. You do away with those, you weaken all of those, and you have an illiberal democracy, if you will. You can see how this all comes into play. You can see how prophecy could easily and quickly be fulfilled. And for those who jump on that bandwagon, they have no clue what they're doing. They're totally deceived. And there's so many in our midst, especially the evangelical world, who are deceived about this. They are lusting for power. You know, my favorite word in Greek class was the word dunamos. You probably remember that word. And the word power. And it's interesting because Paul, throughout all of his epistles, he uses the word power very significantly. He uses that word. If you look up dunamos and you look up the word power, he uses the word power probably more than any other word. And of course, he's talking about the power of the blood, the power of the Lamb, the power of Jesus Christ, to his grace, his infilling grace, his empowering grace, if you will, to help us to become like him. But he warns about one thing, especially in the books of Corinthians, Corinthians 1 and 2, is that culture tends to be more powerful than a person's faith. And so culture was still controlling those early churches in Asia Minor. And he was very worried about that. He was constantly warning them against their culture controlling them. Well, when you look at our culture, people shouting, USA, 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 you know, they're letting their nationalism, their culture, if you will, dominate and control their faith, and therefore it's causing their faith to become corrupted and deceived. And that's where we're at. And I think Paul's warnings are today's warnings. And I'll leave it at that. I know you have questions.
No, listen, I'm so glad you pretty much touched on the subject that I was going to ask you, more questions. But pretty much, I just want to encourage our viewer that if you're watching this video, please fast forward to the end. I'm going to actually try to read those great controversy pages, so people who have no time, they can just listen while driving or, while working. I'm going to read those pages at the end of this interview here. But Pastor Hamilton, what can we do? It seems like the Republican Party, or in Canada, this would be the Conservative Party, are the only ones that are the closest to the Bible. And I will vote, I will join this movement, because the other side, the liberal side, is completely against the Bible. So I will do everything in my power to support and give voice. I even hear some people on television say, I don't even care if Donald Trump is going to be a dictator, but he is on the right side. So what is the danger of that? Of course, you kind of mentioned that, but what are we to do as Christians if we have these two choices?
The mindset is the following. I think that at the root of this, and I experienced this for many years in preaching in many of our churches across the United States, is there's this sense of false piety within our church. This idea that everything is prophetically inevitable. And so because everything's prophetically inevitable, therefore we should basically hasten the coming of Christ. I've heard this from Dr. Ben Carson with personal interviews with him, where, oh yeah, we know that the evils are going to come from the Christian right, from the religious right. Sunday laws and everything is all going to come from the Christian right. But we've got to stand for what is right because it is right and because it's all inevitable anyway. And I call that false piety. I'll tell you why, because it assumes that we have no responsibility. I wrote this recently. Have you ever encountered someone who is so smug and pious about everything, and they think that since everything is prophetically inevitable, they believe, along with like-minded believers, that they have no role or responsibility to preserve and advance the constitutional separation of church and state, religious freedom, civil rights, social justice, and our constitutional system of government as a democratic republic with its separation of powers and corresponding constitutional checks and balances? Often such individuals, Pastor, make varying arguments and justifications. Here are two familiar ones that I have encountered over my many years in ministry in the religious liberty advocacy arena. One, when our country is sinking into religious political fascism, or when justice is denied to super corrupt individuals in high places of influence and power. Oh, well, if God wills it, so be it, especially, if it's their guy, right? And then two, justifying their embarrassing vote for someone who clearly seeks to dismantle the constitutional separation of church state, who's a rapist, who's indicted like 94 indictments, criminal indictments, and yet, and doing everything wrong under the sun, totally ignoring constitutional law and everything else. Why not hasten the fulfillment of the prophecy and the coming of the Lord? Why not bring about a Christian nation by law? And yet I ask them, I've always asked them when I go to churches, when we do not actively help the four angels of Revelation hold back the four winds of strife by championing religious freedom, civil rights, and the Constitution in an effort to defend democratic norms, we are grossly misunderstanding our prophetic role and harboring a selfish spirit. I ask, aren't we supposed to do that? Isn't that our role? And I tell them that if you think against that, it's selfishness, because the whole purpose of helping to hold back the winds of strife is a divinely unselfish one, so that more souls can have the opportunity of knowing and experiencing the love of Jesus. This kind of apathy is scripturally likened to dumb dogs that don't bark. Our prophetic role is to stand before rulers and government officials and in the spirit of Christ professionally plead with them to reverse their course of thinking. This is what the prophets of old in Old Testament times did. Yes, Old Testament prophets were political, and Christ and the Apostle Paul did in the New Testament times. I mean, you think of Jeremiah. My goodness, I mean, he had to deal with all the disinformation campaigns that were there, and alternative fake news, which the kings bought into. And when I say fake news, I mean it in a different way than most people shout fake news. They're usually the ones that are full of fake news. So I think that when we're faced with the threat of autocracy and authoritarianism, we have to speak up. We have to speak up. It is our Christian duty. It is what Christ would have us do. And you say, well, okay, Christ didn't involve himself in those things. Oh, well, yes and no. I mean, I understand that sort of reasoning. There is this sense of inevitability that you can't control. I understand that. But to say that we shouldn't do anything actually goes against Ellen White's writings and the scriptures. Let me give you an example. In Germany, those Adventists who believed all of, the rise of Hitler and fascism and Nazism was inevitable, they backed this madman in the name of law and order, quote unquote, a buzz phrase or slogan that sought to dismantle the Weimar Republic and replace it with an authoritarian strongman. But he's a vegetarian and doesn't drink. Sigh. 3, he is hastening righteousness and the coming of the Lord, which was really nothing more than asserting that this madman was their national savior, along with German Christian nationalism, and promoting the Third Reich, which means millennium on earth, God's kingdom on earth. Make Germany great again. Sound familiar? And that's the language that a presidential candidate is running on and has been running on. What's interesting is that the Adventist leadership in Germany, Marianne, I don't know if you realize this, that the Adventist leadership in Germany only recently officially apologized for their gross lack of discernment and their role in supporting such a madman as Hitler and oppressing others and not advocating the preservation of the Weimar Republic, in which people's constitutional rights were protected. Unfortunately, many in our midst are of the same mindset, blindly, if not willingly, going down the same road because they understand not the true nature of Christ's kingdom and their prophetic message role to rebuke wicked kings and defend the downtrodden and oppressed among us. But they want to be powerful. And this is the other thing, Marion, I'll put this aside. They want to be on the winning side. The temptation is so strong. They think they're on the winning side. They can't stand to be on the losing side. So therefore, the Christian right, it's moral, it's right. And so we must stamp out evil and wickedness and destroy, those we disagree with. That's the spirit of fascism. That's the spirit of dictatorship. That is not the spirit of Christ. That's the spirit of Satan. And they're on the wrong side of prophetic history. I'm reminded that in concentration camps where the Holocaust occurred, who else was there besides Jews? who were gassed and murdered. Who were they? Okay. They were atheists. All right. They were same-sex people. All right. They were Jehovah's Witnesses. They were Seventh-day Adventists involved in the French underground. Okay. They were religious and political dissenters. They were ethnic minorities. They were all in these concentration camps. It wasn't just Jews. And I'm reminded that, you know, sinners, Christ died in the midst of two sinners, two thieves. One repented and the other was blasphemous and cursing of Christ. Jesus died for sinners. And, you know, when you think about it, when we are lumped in with sinners, you're on the right side of prophetic history. And unfortunately, we're on the losing side of prophetic history, not on the winning side. We're on the right side of prophetic history, but we're losing, but we win eternally. We may be martyred, we may be killed, but we win with Christ, who was crucified and resurrected. The winners, okay, who crucified Christ, what came upon them? The destruction of their temple, their city, and utter massacre by the Romans. It's the same thing that's going to happen to the wicked. The temptation to be on the winning side is so strong, Marion, that they are virtually eternally deceived. And I have often felt that it's my role to be like a voice in the wilderness to help to wake these people up as much as I can, to be their friend, to love them, to win their hearts, and then maybe teach them if they're teachable. It's hard, especially out here in gun country, out here in the Wild Wild West in Western Colorado, trust me. But we took it upon our mission to move out here for that very reason. We believe that Christ spent his time with zealots. His disciples, 12 disciples, were zealots. And, you know, it's the same thing out here. The other thing we moved out here for is we believe that people out in the country and out in the wilderness, they're going to take their fight to the big cities where they think all the evil is. So you're actually safer out here where they actually live to mingle among them and to try to help them. So that's kind of our philosophy for moving out here in Western Colorado and retiring.
Yeah, Pastor Hamilton, I'm sure that maybe some people are shocked to hear in today's interview that our church has officially apologized. Our church in Germany, which is the Protestant church, a Seventh-day Adventist church. But I also understand that we are one of the last churches that issued an apology. Many other churches apologized much earlier than that. Why has it taken us so long? And literally, we're the final and the last denomination to apologize. Why are we the last ones to apologize? Why is it so difficult for us Seventh-day Adventists to acknowledge the fact that in the 1930s, there was a book that was published by Jacques Ducan, professor from Andrews University, entitled Thinking in the Shadow of Hell.
Yep.
There he has even pictures with signs, Jews, keep away. Many Jewish Seventh-day Adventists were even removed from membership. And our printing presses in Germany were printing the leaflets, glorifying Hitler. Many young people were distributing these door to door. And up to 80% and 90% of all Christians, including Seventh-day Adventists, voted and supported Hitler, as you said, because he was vegetarian and conservative. And but the question is, why do you think we're the last ones? It kind of, bothers me that we should have been the first ones to apologize,
I wouldn't indict the whole church, and I know that you're not doing that. I think what was happening in Germany is two things. I can start with the Treaty of Versailles by President Woodrow Wilson, who organized that, the end of World War I, and the peace treaty at Versailles. And, the sanctions, the economic sanctions and penalty placed upon Germany was so hard. And it was really the French and the British leading this charge. And Woodrow Wilson tried to scale them back and not be so harsh, but there's no way they could rise above it. And it made them so angry that it basically led to World War II and the rise of Hitler. Now, that's no excuse. Don't misunderstand me here. But German Adventists were very much in this mindset that communism was worse than fascism. Okay. And there's that same mindset here in the United States. Well, socialism, is terrible, and democratic socialism is terrible. We don't want to be like Western Europe and this and that. And so they demagogue anybody, they demonize anybody who, might be for a democratic socialist point of view, like universal health care, for example, or, these sorts of things, which, Canada has and enjoys and has enjoyed for a long time. I lived in Canada. It was nice to walk into a doctor's office and walk out with all that paperwork, without all that paperwork and having to pay anything. It was great. Walked into the dentist, had x-rays done, had my teeth done. It was wonderful. I mean, so I understand the healthcare system may not be as elite as down here. I get that, and maybe that's wrong too. So I don't want to denigrate Canada. But my point is that, there's this cultural mindset that takes over people's thinking. And so they looked at Hitler as a national savior, as many people do with somebody who wants to rise up as a dictator in our country. I personally don't think Trump will be elected. I personally think all of these horribles that we're talking about will not happen, at least not this time. And that's the one thing I wanted to share with you is these things take time. And then when they do happen, it seems like it's overnight, when in fact it takes many, many years. I mean, if you look at the rise of the Christian right, going back to the 1930s even, and of course, reaching a crescendo in the 50s and 60s, where they were anti-civil rights movement. They were anti-rights for Black people and anti-voting rights for Black people, the whole bit. They were trying to take their rights away and persecute them and oppress them. Well, those same people are the ones very much part of that Christian nationalist movement in this country. They're very anti-civil rights. They're very anti-women's rights. It's a mindset that wants to supposedly live in the good old days where there was white supremacy and white rule, and where you had women who knew their place, and if you were gay, you just hid in the closet, okay, or these sorts of things. And so there's this movement today that's little by little. You had the rise of Jerry Falwell and the moral majority. Then there was sort of a lull there where they kind of vanished and they got weak. Then the rise of Pat Robertson and the Christian Coalition, and it got stronger. And then they kind of vanished. And then there was the rise of the Tea Party, okay, which was no more than just a manifestation of the previous two movements, and it's getting stronger and stronger. And then there was a vacuum where the Tea Party movement and Sarah Palin died off, okay? And then all of a sudden, the rise of the MAGA movement. It just seems like it ratchets itself up stronger and stronger, little by little. And the same thing was true if you really trace Hitler, if you trace Nazism in Germany, it was the same way. It was gradual. And then when it happened, it seemed like it was overnight, all of a sudden, when in fact it was gradual all along. And so I've been warning about these movements since that time, since the Jerry Falwell days. And I've been preaching and warning our church against this for the last 45 years, Marion. And people were listening back then, but not so much anymore. There's this lust for power. There's this, I call it spiritualism. There's a demonic spirit that's hovering over this country right now, over the United States. And I bet it's affecting Canada as well. All of North America. Because whatever happens to the United States will happen to you. Trust me. If we think that we can just escape to Canada from the United States, trust me, that's not true. You have individuals up there that are equally as diabolical, if you will, headstrong towards this type of delusion. And that's sort of I really believe we're heading in I believe we're seeing the death throes of democracy around the world. You look at Marie Le Pen in France. Macron is going down in the polls. She probably will take over that country before long. You look at Viktor Orban in Hungary. You look at Putin. You look at the attack on Ukraine. I think we're seeing more and more a rise of illiberal democracies. And I think that's the wave of the prophetic. I believe that's the prophetic future for the world. And it's not a pretty picture. It is not a pretty picture, Marianne. It's
Mm.
not a pretty picture. And I'd like to have a more rosier picture for you, but I just don't.
You raised an interesting point. There is this rise of, you can say, conservative or even extreme conservative movements.
I don't have a problem with conservative, but I have a problem with delusional conservatism. There's good stuff on the
Okay.
conservative side intellectually. I've been a conservative most of my life, theologically and otherwise. But you have to be discerning about these things.
You know, Pastor Hamilton, I myself, I grew up in a very conservative background. I believe I'm conservative myself. At the same time, as I look around, unfortunately, we're not learning from our history just to see what happened in the last, 50, 60, 70, 80 years of many of the mistakes Christians made by following these dictatorial movements. The question for you is, why is there such strong insurgence of this extremism? Isn't it because the left also is pushing its boundaries and creates this
Yes.
kind of reaction?
Yes, it is. And I'll just provide a clarification. I think Adventists are more discerning than most. I will say that. In the United States, I have found that Adventists are more discerning than most conservative evangelicals in this country, in the United States. I don't know about Canada, but I do know down here it's true. In fact, even a Pew survey on religion and public life shows that most Adventists are 60% anywhere from moderate liberal to moderate conservative and just plain moderate. We have thinking people in our church, so I don't want to denigrate our church with this.
Well, especially with the great controversy that we're going to read at
Yeah,
the end of this,
yeah.
telecast.
No, I think there's a
We
lot.
have no excuse. Absolutely, we have no
Yeah,
excuse. Our pioneers warned us about these things
yeah.
happening, right?
Well, I think to answer your question, I think there's a pendulum problem, a pendulum swing issue. And I have a friend back in Vancouver. His name is Brett. And we've gone back and forth. We're like best friends, and we've done so many things together. Great guy. He reminds me of Henry Ford's friendship with Thomas Edison. I don't know if you know their background. I'll share it this way. Henry Ford and Thomas Edison bought like 100 acres down in Fort Myers, Florida, right by the ocean. Beautiful place. And, that was their winter homes. They would winter together down there. And their homes were like 50 yards from each other. They could see what each other's movements, everything. I mean, they'd get together for lunch every day and debate world events. And Henry Ford was very pro-Hitler, very pro-fascism, and thought Hitler was a good thing for the world. And Thomas Edison was completely diametrically opposed to that. And so they had their vigorous discussions, and yet they were the best of friends. But over time, because Thomas Edison had won the heart of Henry Ford and they were best friends, Henry Ford began to apologize and see the light, and there's something about recognizing that people who have their points of view are well-meaning. Most people are well-meaning. We have to understand people's sincerity. I think multimedia, Facebook, Twitter, has just caused people to demonize people. We cut people off, we unfriend them, we block them, we do all kinds of untoward things, and it's just sad. It's really sad. I keep most of my friends. I mean, I've blocked a few that are just absolutely violently obsessive and troll in their trolling and so on. I've done that, but for the most part, I let people have their say, and I listen to them. I learn from them. I learn how wrong they are. But I also, from time to time, I get corrected. There was an article in Newsweek magazine this week about how it's so easy to judge people out in the backwoods in small town America as being a bunch of dumb rednecks. And survey after survey disproves that. Scientific surveys, academic surveys disproves that. And so I say to myself, there's some balancing factors out there that we have to be careful of. We cannot categorize a whole people. We cannot stereotype. And so when somebody is a peacenik and is against all wars, or they're for promoting even same-sex marriage and homosexuality in the church, and even holding office within the church, I am dead set against that, and I will fight to the death for that in our church, okay, against such things. But at the same time, we've got to love those people and try to listen to them and win their hearts. And I think the right's reaction to the left was predictable, and the left's reaction to the right is predictable. And often I'm perceived as on the left, and so be it. But I remind people that I wrote 2 articles in Liberty Magazine literally denouncing President Barack Obama's foreign policy, specifically in regard to international religious freedom policy. And I could go more into that later in another seminar, but it was terrible. Hillary Clinton fought him all the way as his Secretary of State, and finally won the day, and Obama became teachable. But it took a long time. It took a good 4 years for him to turn around on that. And he believed in this doctrine of peaceful coexistence, which is just as dangerous to religious freedom as anything from the Christian right. And unfortunately, the current Pope is very much for this doctrine of peaceful coexistence, which means basically you have a right to peacefully coexist with your religious belief, but you don't have a right to share your faith with anybody else. Otherwise, that would be coercion in their minds and in their thinking. And so there's this clash of civilizations between the East and West. The East thinking that you should have a right to peacefully coexist, but to evangelize someone else or to share your faith with someone else is coercion. Whereas in the Western mindset, the free marketplace of ideas and to share your faith is enshrined in Articles 18 and 19 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is the religious freedom and free speech clauses of the Universal Declaration at the United Nations. But they refuse to recognize it, even though they're signatories to it. That's what's ironic. So it's in the end, both sides, both the left and the right, would take away your religious freedom. So the way I look at it is, and the reason why I say that, if you look at the Puritans, when they founded the American colonies, the colonies during the days of the Puritans, if you look at it, it's very clear that's what they said. They were against the whole idea, the notion, the Anglican Church started in England, this idea of sheep stealing. Oh, don't you dare evangelize us or any of our sheep. You Baptists, you Catholics, you Presbyterians, you Methodists, you German Reform, you Dutch Reform, don't you dare evangelize us, lest we put you in stocks, fine you, or even stone you according to our blasphemy laws under the Massachusetts Bay Colony Charter. Same thing in Connecticut, New Hampshire, all those New England states. You have a right to peacefully coexist, but you don't have a right to share your faith. It's the same mindset that goes clear back to the days of the colonies in our country before the constitutional founders, the revolutionary founders, corrected all that with the First Amendment. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. No, in other words, no one church or religion can dominate or control government or control you, and nor prohibiting the free exercise thereof. That's the First Amendment. That's the doctrine of the separation of church and state that's constitutionally enshrined, that the religious right would love to undo, but the religious left would do the same thing. And so I warn people, I say, be careful of both the left and the right. They'll both deceive you. So if you think I'm just on the left, well, don't. I mean, I'm an equal opportunity offender, is what I tell people, Marianne. I'm an equal opportunity offender. And I believe very strongly about that. And if it gets me killed someday, so be it.
Yeah, very interesting point. Wow, I'm sure that some of the listeners will be challenged by what you shared today, that we can lose religious freedoms on both the right and the left. We don't really hear that, but I never heard anyone say it like the way you said it. And I'm very interested to read some of the articles that you mentioned here, and perhaps we'll make those links. I'm sure these articles are online, so people can click and read the articles that you mentioned
Well,
that you wrote.
let me clarify one thing. One thing you have to understand when I refer to the left, I'm referring to the what I call the interfaith left. I served with the Interfaith Council of Greater Portland and the Interfaith Council of Greater Seattle. And they had this philosophy. You have a right to peacefully coexist, but you don't have a right to share your faith. This comes from mainstream religious people. I'm talking about mainstream Protestants, like Presbyterians, Methodists, Episcopalians, even liberal Baptists, liberal Mormons, liberal Catholics are very much in Sikhs, Muslims, Buddhists, Jews, liberal Jews. They're really into this interfaith movement, and they have this mindset. They're just as dangerous to religious freedom as the Christian right. They're not as prominent in the United States. The interfaith left is more prominent in the international arena. Okay, the United States is definitely the Christian right and Christian nationalism. But nevertheless, they do exist and they do exert their influence in the United States. And so there's both elements that you have to be aware of. And both are threats to religious freedom in the United States. Now, I don't want people to get all scared and all, upset. No, just live your faith with joy in Jesus Christ each and every day. And if the world goes to hell in a handbasket, have that peace of Christ and the joy that sustains you through it all. Because if you're so focused on last day events, it's going to cause you to be really jaded. In fact, it may even cause you to lose your faith and completely give up on Christianity and faith altogether. I don't want that to be the case, Marion. There's too much fear mongering, and yeah, we have a right to point these things out. We have to warn people. But I think that, people who are into time setting and everything and, all this kind of nonsense, it's just fear mongering and it's not necessary. We're saved through Jesus Christ by faith alone, his grace and his grace alone, not by works. We've got to just rest in the joy and the love of Jesus. That's where we need to be.
Indeed, especially as Seventh-day Adventists, the last day events, it's in our name, Adventist, those who are waiting for the second coming. And we've been blessed with wonderful writings of our pioneers. But the next question I want to ask, some Adventists came to me and they asked me, said, Pastor, I think that Jesus in the Bible has never really raised any issues with any government. So it is wrong to even discuss anything about politics, because we should stay away and be completely separate. What would you say to people who believe that the Bible is actually encouraging us to completely, totally stay away from either the right in the Conservative Party or the Liberal in Canada or the Republican in the United States, because it seems like neither party represents the true gospel narrative. Both parties have extremes. And what advice would you give to people who consider just completely stay away from politics, not even vote?
That's an old 19th century Protestant cultural misnomer. They were isolationists. Ellen White even defied her own counsel, which is interesting. I mean, if you go to the 6th volume of the Testimonies, page 400 to 401, those 2 pages, and I think clear over to 406, she warns about that very thing you brought up. But at the same time that she was writing that, she was getting all the town of Battle Creek to rise up against the sitting mayor, who was a drunk, who was a womanizer, who was a gambler. He said in a newspaper interview that he was a shoe-in to get elected because Adventists don't believe in voting. Well, Ellen White went from church to church to church, not just Adventist churches, but non-Adventist churches, and encouraged the whole town to vote that mayor out of office, and to even vote on the Sabbath if necessary, because back in those days, a lot of your polls were open only on the Sabbath, and which is true in some states today, like in Nevada and some others. And so, she had no problem with you voting on the Sabbath. So, in fact, she said that twice in her writings and vocally, lots. And, she was also involved in the Women's Christian Temperance Union, the WCTU, which was aligned with the Lord's Day Alliance of all things, promoting Sunday laws, and the National Reform Movement, which they were all promoting Sunday laws. And yet she was in it just for temperance reform. And so she walked a fine line. And the head of the WCTU, I forget her name now, I wrote an article and published it on how Ellen White walked this fine line. It was published in Liberty Express magazine, not Liberty magazine. It was a magazine that I published for a number of years at the North Pacific Union Conference, a full four-color magazine that I sent out to all the churches and members for about 8 years. Anyway, it was very popular. And I wrote in there for my research on Adventist history that this woman who was the head she had health issues. So Ellen White recommended she go to Battle Creek. And so she was nursed by Harvey Kellogg and so forth there. And Ellen White ministered to her, and she completely flipped, did a 180 and fought with Ellen White against these Sunday laws. And of course, she encouraged A.T. Jones to go forward, and even rebuked our General Conference leadership, who says we should just be preaching the gospel and not being political. and Ellen White says, "You don't understand the third angel's message." She writes in the both the fifth and the seventh volume of the Testimonies. And that's when they decided to get rid of her and send her to New Zealand, or Australia, and get her out of their hair. Which is interesting politics within our church, by the way. But it's amazing. There is a time to speak up. Ecclesiastes 3, there's a time for everything under the sun, Solomon said. And I really believe that. I believe now is the time to speak up, for our people to wake up and to preserve our democratic republic, so that the four winds of strife can be held back longer, so that more souls can be won to Christ. Let's go back to Jesus Christ. When Jesus Christ threw out the corruption in the temple, twice drove out the money changers out of the temple, that was a political move. You don't understand. There was two ruling, you do, but a lot of people don't understand. There was the Sanhedrin, which is the ruling body of the Jews during the time of Christ, and there was Rome, and there was the Roman governor, Pontius Pilate. There was Herod, who was the Jewish king, who, was a vassal king because, Rome occupied Jerusalem and all of Israel. And so you had two forms of government, and the government was ruled by the priestly order. So to throw out the money changers was a political act. Right? People just don't have any idea. You have to remember, when Ellen White warns against politics sometimes, and she was just in tune culturally with all the other Protestant preachers of the day who were very isolationist. Okay. And the Protestant church has come out of that, obviously, in our day. But for many years, going up to the 1800s, clear up to 1930, you had this isolationism and this preaching that, well, Christ said we shouldn't be involved politically. We take the high road and not be involved and just bury our head in the sand. No, even Ellen White said that certain people, leaders in the church in the South, should be excommunicated or disfellowshipped for their role in supporting the Southern Confederates during the Civil War. That's in the first volume of the Testimonies, Marion. I mean, you couldn't get any more political than that. There is a time to speak up. And I believe that when Jesus was constantly rebuking the Pharisees and the religious leaders of the day, it was a political, it wasn't meant to be political, but it was viewed as political. Jesus was no different than Jeremiah, trying to warn the kings, trying to, Isaiah and all the minor prophets, and they were constantly warning kings. They had to be political. It's like religious liberty work. Let me give you another example. If you're a religious liberty director for the Seventh-day Adventist Church, okay, and you're trying to prevent certain types of legislation at the state legislature, or up in Canada, provincial legislatures, okay, provinces, all right, like in Victoria, in where you live, where the government resides for all of British Columbia. Well, and I visited there. It's beautiful. Oh, I love the parliamentary system. It's just beautiful. I admire your system of government a lot. Anyway, very British, of course, but it's really cool. It's a stable governing factor, and you don't really have a queen or a king over you, like in Britain. But you look at here in the United States, you look at religious liberty work, and it's inherently political, because you're trying to defend religious freedom in the minds of politicians, and you're also trying to defend it in the minds of your own people. And it's inherently dealing with political issues, because what are we all worried about? Oh, Sunday law. Okay, so Sunday law is political. It's unconstitutional, which makes it political. Our work is inherently political, whether we want to admit it or not. Liberty Magazine is inherently political, whether we want to admit it or not. And so this pie in the sky idealism is usually put forward by those who are the most political in our midst. They sound all pious, and they try to, use that as well, you should be political, when all the while they're being more political, with their agenda to promote authoritarianism and dictatorship and stupidity and a Christian nation by law, theocracy. And that's what bugs me. It's such hypocrisy. I just don't buy it. I don't buy that reasoning.
Mm-hmm.
I know there's some good, faithful souls who are, bury their head in the sand type people. I guess I'm too political for most people, and I've been told that, but I also believe this is the time. We've got to have a certain trumpet that gives a clear clarion call and a clear clarion sound. And there's danger in politics. Obviously, there's dangers on the left and the right, and it's very clear. But I think these days we just can't avoid it. And try not to get drawn into either side. Try to have a clear head. I've always said in my sermons, take a big snow shovel and shove Anderson Cooper and Rachel Maddow out your living room window. Take Rush Limbaugh, Sean Hannity, and all these right-wing nutcases and shove them out your window. I'm a believer in that. I believe that, that we shouldn't listen to their spin, their understanding of things, and be sold and bought by them. We've got to study for ourselves, read for ourselves. I often tell people that if you were to, and this is sort of egotistic, I admit, but, if somebody thinks they know more than me, I just warn them. I say, well, it would take you 40 years to catch up with everything I've forgotten. Because really, this is my life. I have lived and breathed this and giving warnings, these type of warnings, for the last 45 years. And I'm no saint, I'm nobody, I'm no prophet, but I'm just saying that I think that we as a people need to wake up to history. History repeats itself. All you have to do is look at Germany. All you have to look at is the communist era, Cold War. You have to look at where we are now as a country. We have to get real. We can't just, well, I don't know about any of these things, and then they take sides, and say, just, watch Fox News, or they watch MSNBC or CNN, and they get all their truth from there. No, truth is gained by studying God's word. Be very close to the book Great Controversy, especially Desire of Ages. To me, the life of Christ helps people to navigate better than anything else. So that's why I'm writing my book right now called Christian Nationalism and Calvary's Prophetic Warning. It's basically a parallel to Jewish nationalism in Christ's day that ended up crucifying Christ and rejecting Christ because of their sense of nationalism, their political nationalism, their sense of um, cultural and national pride. It's what will lead to Christ being crucified today. Um, so and being on the wrong side of prophetic history. So that's where a lot of our people are headed. And when I say our people, I mean Christianity in general.
You know, it's interesting, Pastor, that many years ago we were celebrating this idea that, we have more access to information, knowledge shall increase. And especially in 2024, I mean, you have access to any broadcast. The internet is filled with information. But what's alarming is that even I have my own relatives and friends who have become extreme in their views, because the problem is not with the overflow of information, but the problem often is with our
Mm-hmm.
filter. And I'm glad that you mentioned that this filter that differentiates between right and wrong can only be informed by reading the Bible, asking the Holy Spirit to guide you. And unfortunately, I've seen radicalization in my own family. Radical ideas have been downloaded literally from YouTube or internet. And frankly speaking, somebody may be watching us and thinking, "Man, these guys, these bunch of radicals here, speaking nonsense. They're a
That's all
bunch of
right.
crazy liberals."
Yeah, that's all right. Everybody's on a journey. I have a lot of sympathy for people. And the thing that's what controls people is conspiracy theories. And that's the filter, the lens that you're talking about, that they filter. If they go to a revelation seminar or evangelistic series, many people who are baptized filter it through their lens, their background, their prejudices, their biases, and so they filter it through that. But they're on a journey, and so we've got to be patient with people. Christ was, he was. I mean, look at the patience with his disciples. Man, they were a bunch of dunderheads. I mean, come on, they were a bunch of blockheads. I mean, he suffered with them. He taught them and taught them and taught them about the true nature of his kingdom. Did they get it? No, they didn't get it until the upper room, even after he left. It was the outpouring of the Holy Spirit. You can read that in Acts of the Apostles. It's somewhere between pages 35 and 44. It's a beautiful chapter on the outpouring of the Holy Spirit, but it says they finally understood. A light illuminated them from the Holy Spirit, and they finally understood the true nature of the kingdom of God. And they finally had all the wrong teachings of the priests and Pharisees and scribes and rabbis erased, and they finally understood the truth in its clearest beauty. And I so celebrate. That's one of my favorite references in
Mhm.
Spirit of Prophecy by Ellen White.
But you know what's interesting, Pastor Hamilton, that not too long ago I read an interesting book that said that out of the 12 disciples, Jesus chose them from, different parts, different economic background. But what it shocked me is that out of the 12, Jesus chose 11 from Galilee, which was north from Judea,
Uh-huh.
way north by the Sea of Galilee. But only one came from Judea. And then the author described that Judea was mostly conservative. It was one of the wealthiest neighborhood. Well, this is where the
Right.
capital is,
Right.
and this was the place of elite neighborhoods. Galilee was more like a low class, more
Right.
liberal neighborhood, poor
Yeah.
housing, subsidized housing,
Right.
violent neighborhoods.
Yeah.
Is anything good come out of Nazareth? That kind of stuff. And
Right.
then he says that out of those 12, only one came from the very conservative background, only one. And that one was the only one that sold Jesus for 30 pieces of silver, and that's
Right.
Judas. And the
Yes.
rest of the 11
Yeah.
came from a more liberal, as I said from the beginning. I myself consider myself conservative. At the same time, as we read the Gospels, it seems like the Pharisees and the Sadducees, the most conservative branch of Judaism, gave the biggest opposition to Jesus Christ. And then when you go to the Spirit of Prophecy, our Adventist pioneers they describe the disciples from Galilee as those who were more open-minded to accept Jesus.
Well, but
Those who were more conservative, were more close-minded.
right.
And so Jesus, it seems, had an easier time to do with people who are a little bit more liberal, more open-minded, than with those who are ultra-conservative and close-minded. So only one came from the ultra-conservative background.
That's fascinating. I want to pick your brain more about that later. At the same time, they are all looking for a political messiah, regardless of their political views, if you will, to drive the Romans out from their midst, and then they could duke it out on the liberal versus conservative, later. But yeah, no, I get what you're saying. That's interesting. I knew that about Judas. I wasn't sure about the others. That's fascinating. That blows my mind.
And what's interesting, the warning to all of us conservatives is that we unfortunately have a kind of a history for having too much pride, too much close-mindedness,
Yes.
and that is the greatest danger. But I wonder if you would give us an honor and read The Great Controversy, the pages that you mentioned, even if it takes 15, 20 minutes, because I believe this is such an important time for us, for people to hear the Great Controversy book, one of the greatest classics of all time in Christian literature. And you have a radio voice, Greg.
I'm gonna start with Great Controversy, page 440. I'm not going to read the whole chapter because if I do, it's just way too long. Okay, here we go. But the beast with lamb-like horns in Revelation 13, verse 11, was seen coming up out of the earth. Instead of overthrowing other powers to establish itself, the nation thus represented must arise in territory previously unoccupied and grow up gradually and peacefully. It could not then arise among the crowded and struggling nationalities of the old world. That turbulent sea of peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues that must be sought in the Western continent. What nation of the New World was in 1798 rising into power, giving promise of strength and greatness and attracting the attention of the world? The application of the symbol admits of no question. One nation and only one meets the specifications of this prophecy. It points unmistakably to the United States of America. Again and again, the thought, almost the exact words of the sacred writer, has been unconsciously employed by the orator and the historian in describing the rise and growth of this nation. The beast was seen coming up out of the earth. And according to the translators, the word here rendered coming up literally signifies to grow or spring up as a plant. And as we have seen, the nation must arise in territory previously unoccupied. I've always referred to Revelation 13, verse 11, where it says that it comes up out of the earth. The earth represents newness, new world. And another indication of that is that only in the United States was citizenship based upon you owning property. So earth was very important. Citizenship and property were tied together. So that's an identifying characteristic that indeed was the United States rising up in the New World. Okay. And number two, if you've ever heard the Great Land Rush, where they went out to Oklahoma and they raced and could stake out their own land and own thousands of acres and grow crops and everything. That was a great land rush. And then later you had the Great Gold Rush. That was the rise of the New World, the United States. And so the word earth is very significant versus sea with the upcoming of the first beast, Rome, in Revelation 13, verse 1. It's in reference to many nations, language, tongues, and so forth. That's Revelation 17:15 that describes that symbol as Europe. So a prominent writer describing the rise of the United States speaks of the mystery of her coming forth from vacancy and says, like a silent seed, we grew into empire. G.A. Townsend, The New World Compared with the Old, page 462. A European journal in 1850 spoke of the United States as a wonderful empire which was emerging, and amid the silence of the earth, daily adding to its power and pride. That's from the Dublin Nation in Ireland. Edward Everett, in an oration on the Pilgrim founders of this nation, said, "Did they look for a retired spot, inoffensive for its obscurity and safe in its remoteness? where the little church of Leyden might enjoy the freedom of conscience? Behold the mighty regions over which in peaceful conquest they have borne the banners of the cross. Speech delivered at Plymouth, Massachusetts, December 22, 1824, page 11. And he had two horns like a lamb. The lamb-like horns indicate youth, innocence, and gentleness, fitly representing the character of the United States when presented to the prophet as coming up in 1798. Among the Christian exiles who first fled to America and sought an asylum from royal oppression and priestly intolerance were many who determined to establish a government upon the broad foundation of civil and religious liberty. Their views found place in the Declaration of Independence, written by Thomas Jefferson, which sets forth the great truth that all men are created equal and endowed with the inalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And the Constitution guarantees to the people the right of self-government, providing that representatives elected by the popular vote shall enact and administer the laws. Freedom of religious faith was also granted, every man being permitted to worship God according to the dictates of his conscience. Republicanism and Protestantism became the fundamental principles of the nation. These principles are the secret of its power and prosperity. The oppressed and downtrodden throughout Christendom have turned to this land with interest and hope. Millions have sought its shores, and the United States has risen to a place among the most powerful nations of the earth. And I would say that would be true of Canada. One thing I want to insert this point, it's very important. A lot of people say, if you say the word democracy is overused here in the United States, and so conservatives like to hammer that down and says, no, we're a republic. Well, they're both wrong. As a constitutional scholar, I will tell you that we are a democratic republic. What makes us a republic is the Electoral College. The Electoral College says that the state electors determine who the president is, okay? And but then again, in the Constitution, it says we the people. We the people, and that represents the popular vote. So anytime there's a presidential election, there's the Electoral College and there's the popular vote. Yes, the Electoral College ultimately determines that. That makes us a republic, but we the people makes us a democracy. And if left alone, be a pure democracy, which would be wrong. If we were a pure republic, that would be wrong. We are a democratic republic, and even more so since the ratification of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, which freed the slaves, gave them citizenship rights, gave everyone equal protection under the law, and of course the 15th Amendment giving Black people and all people the right to vote, except for women. That didn't come around until, I think that was the, I forget which amendment that was, but it might have been the 20th or 21st Amendment. Maybe it was the 19th, I don't remember. But it was one of those amendments, and suffrage occurred. And Ellen White was quietly in favor of suffrage. She didn't say much about it. She didn't want to get too involved with that issue, but she clearly was for a woman who spoke out as much as she did. She exemplified it. I'm at Great Controversy, page 441, paragraph 2. But the beast with lamb-like horns spake as a dragon, and he exercises all the power of the first beast before him, and causeth the earth and them which dwell therein to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed, saying to them that dwell on the earth that they should make an image to the beast, which had the wound by a sword and did live. Revelation 13, verses 11 to 14. The lamb-like horns and dragon voice of the symbol point to a striking contradiction between the professions and the practice of the nation thus represented. The speaking of the nation is the action of its legislative and judicial authorities. By such action, it will give the lie to those liberal and peaceful principles which it has put forth as the foundation of its policy. The prediction that it will speak as a dragon and exercise all the power of the first beast plainly foretells a development of the spirit of intolerance and persecution that was manifested by the nations represented by the dragon and the leopard-like beast. And the statement that the beast with two horns causeth the earth and them which dwell therein to worship the first beast indicates that the authority of this nation is to be exercised in enforcing some observance which shall be an act of homage to the papacy. Such action would be directly contrary to the principles of this government, to the genius of its free institutions, to the direct and solemn avowals of the Declaration of Independence, and to the Constitution. The founders of the nation wisely sought to guard against the employment of secular power on the part of the church, with its inevitable result, intolerance of persecution, those who want the church to control the state and the government. This is what you get. Let me read that again. The founders of this nation, I'm talking about George Washington, James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, John Adams. I'm talking about all those guys, okay? The founders of this nation, the United States, wisely sought to guard against the employment of secular power on the part of the church, or we could say religious peoples or churches, with its inevitable result, intolerance and persecution. I call that religious political fascism. The Constitution provides that Congress shall make no law. This is the First Amendment. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. And that no religious test, this is Article 6, Section 3 of the Constitution, no religious test shall ever be required as a qualification to any office or public trust under the United States. We're not supposed to put religious tests on people when they're running for office. Only in flagrant violation of these safeguards to the nation's liberty can any religious observance be enforced by civil authority. But the inconsistency of such action is no greater than is represented in the symbol. It is the beast with lamb-like horns, in profession pure, gentle, and harmless, that speaks as a dragon, saying to them that dwell on the earth that they should make an image to the beast. Here is clearly presented a form of government in which the legislative power rests with the people, a most striking evidence that the United States is the nation denoted in the prophecy. But what is the image to the beast, and how is it to be formed? The image is clearly made by the two-horned beast, and it is an image to the first beast. It is also called an image of the beast. Then, to learn what the image is like and how it is to be formed, we must study the characteristics of the beast itself, the papacy. When the early church became corrupted by departing from the simplicity of the gospel, we're going back to the days of Justin Martyr, Polycarp, all these different people, the first, we could even go as late as St. Augustine and Jerome and all those guys, okay? But here, clearly, it says, when the early church became, this is right after the apostles, right after the disciples, right after Christ was resurrected and ascended. When the early church became corrupted, this is after the days of Paul. All the things Paul warned about, the church went and the early church became corrupted. Sad. When the early church became corrupted by departing from the simplicity of the gospel and accepting heathen rites and customs, she lost the spirit and power of God. I also think of Constantine here, Emperor Constantine. And in order to control the consciences of the people, she sought the support of the secular power. The result was the papacy, a church that controlled the power of the state and employed it to further her own ends, especially for the punishment of heresy. Here's the key reference. In order for the United States, my beloved country, and your neighbor, to form an image of the beast in the likeness of Rome, that is, the papacy, the religious power or powers, and I talked to the United State, this word actually, the religious power, is plural. It's not singular. Power is in reference to powers, must so control the civil government that the authority of the state will also be employed by the church to accomplish her own ends. In other words, it's not just talking about Rome. Adventists have always assumed, this is the Catholic Church. No, this is in context, as we shall continue to read, about Protestants uniting with Catholics to make this happen. Okay, so this power is plural. All right. The other thing is, you notice it doesn't say, instead of here it says religious power, it doesn't say same-sex people, atheists. It doesn't say communists or socialists. It doesn't say unionists. Okay? It doesn't say Republicans or Democrats. It says the religious power must so control the civil government that the authority of the state, that is the government, Republicans and Democrats, will also be employed by the church or these powerful religious powers to accomplish her own ends. Whenever the church has obtained secular power, she has employed it to punish dissent from her doctrines. Protestant churches that have followed in the steps of Rome by forming alliance with worldly powers have manifested a similar desire to restrict liberty of conscience. An example of this is given in the long-continued persecution of dissenters by the Church of England. During the 16th and 17th centuries, thousands of nonconformist ministers were forced to flee from their churches, and many, both of pastors and people, were subjected to fine, imprisonment, torture, and martyrdom. It was apostasy that led the early church to seek the aid of the civil government, and this prepared the way for the development of the papacy, the beast. Said Paul, there shall come a falling away, and that man of sin be revealed. So apostasy in the church will prepare the way for the image to the beast. The Bible declares that before the coming of the Lord, there will exist a state of religious declension similar to that in the first centuries. In the last days, perilous times shall come, for men shall be lovers of their own selves, covetous, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, without natural affection, truce breakers, false accusers, incontinent, fierce, despisers of those that are good, traitors, heady, high-minded, lovers of pleasure more than lovers of God, having a form of godliness, but denying the power thereof. It sounds like what I hear in the news today, where an ungodly man is being propped up by religious peoples for the sake of power. All they want, they lust after power. They want religious power. They want power to control the government. And so they see a man who will deliver that for them, an evil man, pure evil, if you will. Now the Spirit speaketh expressly that in the latter times some shall depart from the faith, giving heed to seducing spirits and doctrines of devils. Satan will work with all power and signs and lying wonders, with all deceivableness of unrighteousness, and all that receive not the love of the truth, that they might be saved, will be left to accept strong delusion, that they should believe a lie. Wow, we see that happening today. When the state of ungodliness shall be reached, the same results will follow as in the first centuries. What's amazing, Marion, is that these people think they're actually being religious, when in fact they're in a state of the worst form of ungodliness. That's what's amazing. It's a paradox, isn't it? So it goes on. I'm on page 444, paragraph 2. The wide diversity of belief in the Protestant churches is regarded by many as decisive proof. Here we go, this self-righteousness is what I said. As decisive proof that no effort to secure a forced uniformity can ever be made. Separation. Who could ever abolish the Constitution? That could never happen. But there has been for years, it says, in churches of the Protestant faith, a strong and growing sentiment in favor of a union based upon common points of doctrine. To secure such a union, a discussion of subjects upon which all were not agreed, however important they might be from a Bible standpoint, must be necessarily weighed. There's a video by that I used to show in churches. I think I showed it at your church, by Rick Warren, with his famous mega church down there in Southern California, where he talks about, the Catholics aren't so bad. Catholics agree with Protestants on most things. In fact, Protestants and Catholics, they agree on most issues on family and protecting life, the sanctity of life, referring to abortion, and referring to family, meaning that we're anti-gay marriage and anti-homosexuality, and we're united on all these social political issues, these cultural issues. Forget doctrine. He says, well, doctrine is not really what matters. He says, we agree on the most common points, he said, in that video. And I think of that and I think, oh my, this is just right out of the Great Controversy here. 3. Charles Beecher, in a sermon in the year 1846, declared that the ministry of the evangelical Protestant denominations is not only formed all the way up under a tremendous pressure of merely human fear, but they live and move and breathe in a state of things radically corrupt and appealing every hour to every baser element of their nature to hush up the truth and bow the knee to the power of apostasy. Was not this the way things went with Rome? Are we not living her life over again? And what do we see just ahead? Boy, Ellen White was so way ahead of her time. Another general council, a world's convention, evangelical alliance and universal creed, sermon on the Bible, a sufficient creed, delivered at Fort Wayne, Indiana. When this shall be gained, then in an effort to secure complete uniformity, it will be only a step to resort to force. When the leading churches of the United States This is what you quoted earlier. When the leading churches of the United States, uniting upon such points of doctrine as are held by them in common, shall influence the state or the government, the United States government, to enforce their decrees and to sustain their institutions, then Protestant America will have formed an image of the Roman hierarchy, and the infliction of civil penalties upon dissenters will inevitably result. The beast with two horns causeth or commands all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell save he that had the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. The third angel's warning is, if any man worship the beast in his image and receive his mark in his forehead or in his hand, the same shall drink of the wine of the wrath of God. The beast mentioned in this message, whose worship is enforced by the two-horned beast, is the first or leopard-like beast of Revelation 13, the papacy. The image to the beast represents that form of apostate Protestantism, which will be developed when the Protestant churches shall seek the aid of the civil power for the enforcement of their dogmas. The mark of the beast still remains to be defined. In other words, it's coming, is basically what she's saying. After the warning against the worship of the beast and his image, the prophecy declares, here are they that keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. Since those who keep God's commandments are thus placed in contrast with those that worship the beast and his image and receive his mark, it follows that the keeping of God's law, on the other hand, and its violation on the other, will make the distinction between the worshipers of God and the worshipers of the beast. The special characteristic of the beast, and therefore of his image, is the breaking of God's commandments. Says Daniel of the little horn, the papacy, he shall think to change times and the law. Daniel 7:25, very important chapter in the Bible, Daniel 7. That's from the Revised Version. And Paul styled the same power the man of sin who was to exalt himself above God. One prophecy is a complement of the other. Only by changing God's law could the papacy exalt itself above God. Whoever should understandingly keep the law as thus changed would be giving supreme honor to that power by which the change was made. Such an act of obedience to papal laws would be a mark of allegiance to the Pope in the place of God. The papacy has attempted to change the law of God. The second commandment forbidding image worship has been dropped from the law, and the fourth commandment has been so changed as to authorize the observance of the first instead of the seventh day as the Sabbath. But papists urge as a reason for omitting the second commandment that it is unnecessary, being included in the first, and that they are giving the law exactly as God designed it to be understood. This cannot be the change foretold by the prophet. An intentional, deliberate change is presented. He shall think to change the times and the law. The change in the fourth commandment exactly fulfills the prophecy. For this, the only authority claimed is that of the church. Here, the papal power openly sets itself above God himself. While the worshipers of God will be especially distinguished by their regard for the fourth commandment, since this is the sign of his creative power and the witness to his claim upon man's reverence and homage, the worshipers of the beast will be distinguished by their efforts to tear down the Creator's memorial, to exalt the institution of Rome. It was in behalf of the Sunday that popery first asserted its arrogant claims. It says, see appendix. And its first resort to the power of the state was to compel the observance of Sunday as the Lord's day. But the Bible points to the seventh day and not to the first as the Lord's day. Said Christ, the Son of Man is Lord also as the Sabbath, Lord of the Sabbath. The fourth commandment declares the seventh day as a Sabbath to the Lord. And by the prophet Isaiah, the Lord designates it my holy day. See Mark chapter 2, verse 28, Isaiah chapter 58, verse 13. I'm on page 447, paragraph 1, if anybody is following. The claim so often put forth that Christ changed the Sabbath is disproved by his own words. In his Sermon on the Mount, he said, think not that I am come to destroy the law or the prophets. I am come not to destroy, but to fulfill. For verily I say unto you, till heaven and earth pass, one jot or one tittle shall in no wise pass from the law, till all be fulfilled. Whosoever therefore shall break one of these least commandments, and shall teach men so, he shall be called the least in the kingdom of heaven. But whosoever shall do and teach them, the same should be called great in the kingdom of heaven. Matthew chapter 5, verses 17 to 19. It is a fact generally admitted by Protestants that the scriptures give no authority for the change of the Sabbath. This is plainly stated in publications issued by the American Tract Society and the American Sunday School Union. One of these works acknowledges the complete silence of the New Testament so far as any explicit command for the Sabbath, Sunday, the first day of the week, or definite rules for its observance are concerned. So says George Eliot in the book The Abiding Sabbath, page 184. Another says, up to the time of Christ's death, no change had been made in the day. And so far as the record shows, they, the apostles, did not give any explicit command enjoining the abandonment of the seventh-day Sabbath and its observance on the first day of the week. That's from A.E. Waffle, The Lord's Day, pages 186 to 188. Roman Catholics acknowledge that the change of the Sabbath was made by their church and declare that Protestants, by observing the Sunday, are recognizing her power. In the Catholic Catechism of Christian Religion, in answer to question as to the day to be observed in obedience to the fourth commandment, this statement is made. During the old law, Saturday was the day sanctified, but the church, instructed by Jesus Christ and directed by the Spirit of God, has substituted Sunday for Saturday. So now we sanctify the first, not the seventh day. Sunday means, and now is, the day of the Lord. As the sign of the authority of the Catholic Church, Papist writers cite the very act of changing the Sabbath into Sunday, which Protestants allow of, because by keeping Sunday, they acknowledge the Church's power to ordain feasts and to command them under sin. Henry Tuberville, from his book, An Abridgment of the Christian Doctrine, page 58. What then is the change of the Sabbath, but the sign or mark of the authority of the Roman Church, the mark of the beast? The Roman Church has not relinquished her claim to supremacy, and when the world and the Protestant churches accept a Sabbath of her creating, while they reject the Bible Sabbath, they virtually admit this assumption. They may claim the authority of tradition and of the fathers, but in so doing, they ignore the very principle which separates them from Rome, that the Bible, and the Bible only, is the religion of Protestants. The Papist can see that they are deceiving themselves, willingly closing their eyes to the facts in the case. As the movement for Sunday enforcement gains favor, he rejoices, feeling assured that it will eventually bring the whole Protestant world under the banner of Rome. Romanists declare that the observance of Sunday by the Protestants is an homage they pay, in spite of themselves, to the authority of the Catholic Church. That's from Monsignor Ségur, from his book, Plain Talk About the Protestantism of Today, page 213. The enforcement of Sunday keeping on the part of Protestant churches is an enforcement of the worship of the papacy, of the beast. Those who, understanding the claims of the fourth commandment, choose to observe the false instead of the true Sabbath are thereby paying homage to that power by which alone it is commanded. But in the very act of enforcing a religious duty by secular power, the churches would themselves form an image to the beast. Hence, the enforcement of Sunday keeping in the United States would be an enforcement of the worship of the beast and his image. That's very clear. 449, paragraph 1. We're almost finished. But Christians of past generations observed the Sunday, supposing that in so doing they were keeping the Bible Sabbath. And there are now true Christians in every church, not accepting the Roman Catholic communion, who honestly believe that Sunday is the Sabbath of divine appointment. God accepts their sincerity of purpose and integrity before him. Amen. But when Sunday observance shall be enforced by law, and the world shall be enlightened concerning the obligation of the true Sabbath, then whosoever shall transgress the command of God to obey a precept which has no higher authority than that of Rome, will thereby honor popery above God. He is paying homage to Rome and to the power which enforces the institution ordained by Rome. He is worshiping the beast and his image. As men then reject the institution which God has declared to be the sign of his authority and honor in its stead that which Rome has chosen as the token of her supremacy, they will thereby accept the sign of allegiance to Rome, the mark of the beast. And it is not until the issue is thus plainly set before the people, and they are brought to choose between the commandments of God and the commandments of men, that those who continue in transgression will receive the mark of the beast. The most fearful threatening ever addressed to mortals is contained in the third angel's message. That must be a terrible sin which calls down the wrath of God unmingled with mercy. Men are not to be left in darkness concerning this important matter. The warning against this sin is to be given to the world before the visitation of God's judgments, that all may know why they are to be inflicted and have opportunity to escape them. Prophecy declares that the first angel would make his announcement to every nation and kindred and tongue and people. The warning of the third angel, which forms a part of the same threefold message, is to be no less widespread. It is represented in the prophecy as being proclaimed with a loud voice by an angel flying in the midst of heaven, and it will command the attention of the world. Amen. In the issue of the contest, all Christendom will be divided into two great classes or groups: those who keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus, and those who worship the beast and his image and receive his mark. Although church and state will unite their power to compel all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive the mark of the beast, yet the people of God will not receive it. The prophet of Patmos, John the Beloved, beholds them that had gotten the victory over the beast, and over his image, and over his mark, and over the number of his name, stand on the sea of glass, having the harps of God, and singing the song of Moses and the Lamb. Revelation chapter 15, verses 2 and 3.
Amen.
It's a powerful reading.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Pastor Hamilton. Thank you for your time. At the end, any last words?
Yeah, you really worked me over hard. I would like to say one thing. Of the reading, I think the most important point in there is actually the loud cry. I'll tell you why. It gives time for people to repent and turn with the warnings given. And I think that's important to remember, is that God does not want anybody to receive the mark of the beast or his image. They want people to accept him and as the creator and the true God, not a counterfeit. And right about this time too, in the next chapter, it's not actually in the next chapter, several chapters beyond that. It's about the same time, though, Ellen White says from her visions that Satan will attempt to appear as Christ himself and deceive the whole world. So while they've got the peer pressure to adhere to Rome, you've got Satan appearing as this angelic being, as Christ himself, to convince them that this is true. It's an overwhelming delusion. And I mean, even if the elect could be deceived, Christ says, obviously they won't, the elect will not. But the point is that even if they could, it's because there's this overwhelming delusion, and it's coming. And you can see it with the advent of all this disinformation campaigns. I mean, Hitler used it to lie all the time, to create false history, false narratives. Same thing is happening in the United States, okay, to get people to believe a lie. A demonic spirit is alive and well in this country, and it's very evident to me. Even if you watch the news, it's pretty clear. But a lot of people are not discerning of that. So they think all the evil is those who are, immoral, and okay, sure, they're immoral. They're not right with God. I agree. But they have to understand that the spirit of self-righteousness, fundamentalism, the spirit of Pharisaism, what I call is the Pharisaical gospel of traditional moral values, will not save anybody. It will deceive you. And that's where the world is headed, towards this false view of righteousness, which is actually very ungodly. It's just the opposite, but they just don't recognize it. Well, I have one final word, and that is, I'm going to be very clear about this. There's a problem within Adventism. There's a problem with evangelical. I don't want anybody to follow after me. You got that? I don't want people to follow my words as if they're the last gospel word on the earth. I don't want that. I want to run from that. Okay? You understand what I'm saying?
Pastor, thank you so much. Would you be kind to end our interview with prayer at the end?
Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for your mercy on us foolish people. and people who are slow to understand, slow to believe, as the disciples were of old. Lord, help us to not give in to the cultural peer pressures of the day, whether they be unsanctified on the left, or whether they be puritanical on the right, Lord, which is, to me, more deceptive in the minds of faithful Christians and religious peoples. And I just pray that you would help us to be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. Help us to divide your word rightly, and to understand today's events, to divide it rightly, to be people who walk in truth and not our own egos, our own boastfulness, or to follow anyone else's boastfulness and demagoguery. Help us to have our eyes wide open. Help us to, may we plead with your Holy Spirit to guide us into all truth and to not be deceived. Help us to be people of faith that are here to save souls, to help warn others, and to warn them against fanaticism and deep delusion, even from well-meaning people who are time-setting, as if they're the leading prophetic expositors in our church. Lord, help us to go to you alone and not to men. And no matter how smart they think they are, or no matter how compelled or convinced they think they are, that we should listen to them. Help us to be converted. Help our worldviews to be completely converted, Lord. That's what Jesus wanted the disciples to do. Have their hearts and minds changed so that they recognize him as the true Savior of heaven, not of earth, and to prepare to take them home at last to a heavenly kingdom. Lord, I pray that you would prepare us in the same way. Help us not have our sights set on this earth, but on your kingdom of glory in heaven. And someday you will come back with your faithful. You promise to create a new earth and a new heavens, of which we will occupy. What a glorious day that will be. And all wickedness and liars and deceivers will be destroyed. Pray for that day, and I pray that we will be faithful, keep us humble. And Lord, help us to have that faith relationship with you that no man, no government, no church, no culture can break. I pray in Jesus' name, amen.